Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians of the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is within your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, or other healthcare professionals.
Well, hello and good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another webinar. And today we are going to be talking about intermittent fasting. This is such a hot topic. It has been in recent years, and even more so today in the health field and biohacking, but also in benefits for helping different conditions, weight loss, you name it. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I, again, have the great pleasure to be here discussing this topic with Justin, one of our esteemed practitioners here at the DNA company, and highly regarded by the clients he works with, as well as we, his practitioners in arms. And Justin, please say hello to our group tonight.
Hello, everybody. And right back at you, by the way, Dr. Laura, you get your share of good reviews as well. So it's not just about me. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about this concept, right? This feast and famine concept that our species has been engaging in for a super long time. I can't help but, chuckle a little bit when people refer to intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating as being kind of a fad, right? They say, oh, you're doing that IF thing. That's a fad. It's like, well, this has been around for a super long period of time, right? I mean, throughout sapient history, we ate and we didn't eat. Right? There was always that concept. If you're not eating, you're fasting to an extent. So unless you're eating every minute of the day, you are in fact engaging in a feast or a famine cycle. And the health benefits, I would say, are pretty highly touted. And it's a great tool for a lot of stuff. It can help with microbiome. It can help with hormones. It can help with autophagy, right? Which we'll talk about all of these things today. I practiced it myself for quite some time in one iteration or another. At the moment, I'm actually all the way down to just doing kind of a 12 and 12 strategy myself. I'd be curious to what you're doing these days, Dr. Laura.
Well, honestly, I have played around with different types of fasting schedules, but oftentimes I do stick with a time-restricted eating. And before I dive into some of the things that I do, I would like to describe and explain the difference between the two. It's like we're using these terms, and sometimes people, might have an idea, but not really understand the difference. And I'll tell you that there is even some wiggle room for the definitions of what these two actually encompass within the functional medicine field, biohacking, and in general. And they are very similar, I have to tell you, but there are differences more so in the focusing and how you do, kind of like two Venn diagrams that are, overlapping, but still have some areas of differences. So first, let's talk about time-restricted eating. So time-restricted eating is exactly what it explains. You are restricting the timing of when you're eating. And really, the time-restricted eating, it focuses on that eating window. So when and what you eat. Now, I do have to say, both of these things do have a scientific basis. There are benefits in each of them. And there is research from highly regarded places like the Salk Institute and research that's published in, peer-reviewed journals on these, types of eating or fasting styles. With the time-restricted eating, it really is flexible in the dieting. It has less focus on hormones, okay? It encourages restriction of calories oftentimes, but that doesn't always have to be the case. Actually, the Salk Institute, which I had just mentioned, did research on time-restricted eating with mice, where the two arms, what they did is they had one group where they allowed them to eat, a couple of meals during the day, but then let them kind of graze the rest of the time on their own. Where the other arm, they only gave them food during a certain period of time. And yes, they did show benefits, some weight loss in the arm of where they only restricted their eating within a certain window as compared to those who kept eating. And there were other markers that showed health benefits. So that's scientific background into that. But when we get into intermittent fasting, now this focuses on the fasting window rather than the eating window. There is a really big focus on hormones and hormone regulation. It leverages this longevity approach, okay? The benefits of longevity, getting into autophagy, the microbiome, cleaning up the microbiome and allowing gut rest. And this is more what we're going to be focusing on in this webinar today. And the thing with intermittent fasting, again, listen to the words. This is focused and done intermittently. It is the fasting. You generally don't want to be doing longer fasts on a regular basis because that can end up, you can have the benefits initially, but then have some detriment later on, where it is intermittent. And we'll talk about the different types of time because we blend in a little bit of the time restricted eating, okay? Like you were saying, the 12-12. Okay, that is restricting your eating window within that 12 hours if you are doing that on a more regular basis, as compared to, say, that you fast 1 day a week, or you do a 5-2 where you eat normally for 5 days, you fast for 2 days, but not in concession. You do like 1 day and then another 5 days or a few days within that window. Then you fast for another day. So it's generally those longer fasts that are more than 24 hours, 24, 48, getting into the longers, that where you're actually fasting. And I'll tell you that intermittent fasting, this is used as a tool versus a restriction. And the benefits when it comes to the hormones that I mentioned earlier, it elevates your hormones. And specifically in this European Journal of Endocrinology, they found that it increases growth hormone by 2,000%. It increased bioavailable free testosterone by 180% and increased luteinizing hormone by 67%. So, where the time restricted eating, restricting calories, doing that for a length of time, that can actually tank your hormones. So again, they're very similar, but focusing on the difference and realizing the differences. So for myself, I typically work and do like a 16-8. What that means is that I usually have about 16 hours of not eating, and then I eat within 8 hours. Sometimes I'll do a 12-12, but most of the time it ends up being 16-8. When I travel, I fast. And, being on a plane in an airport, I don't like airport food. You never know what's in it. So to not have to worry about that, I just don't eat. I stay hydrated. That's very important. Yes, I drink black coffee. That does not break my fast. But generally, I like to fast when I travel.
Yeah, well, that's what I like about fasting too, is that the versatility of it is there. If you get used to it to where it's part of your lifestyle, you can throw in a fast when life is in fact going too fast, right? When it comes to something like travel, or if you just got a crazy work day, it might just be a day to not eat for a while, right? You're going to get some positive adaptations that happen anyway. And then when the time comes to go ahead and eat, you eat. Most of us actually feel pretty good in that fasted state. And that is a primal mechanism, right? Because this really relates back to the hunter-gatherer days. And when our ancestors were engaging in, let's say, a hunt, well, they had to have good cognition and they had to have good strength and what have you in the absence of food, right? When it's time to go kill the mammoth, I want my BDNF elevated, which happens about 24 hours into a fast. I want my growth hormone and testosterone elevated so I can be aggressive and strong. So that's what a lot of that ties back to, right? We needed to be strong and cognizant in a fasted state in order to be successful as hunters and gatherers. So it's really cool what an ancient kind of mechanism a lot of this stuff plays on.
And we have to remember, they didn't have grocery stores. It's not like there was food available whenever they felt like it. They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have those things. We're talking hunters and gatherers. You had to find your food. So there was going to be times that you couldn't find any or that it was sparse. So we are genetically predisposed to be able to fast and to survive. So, I mean, you could easily, not easily, you could go 40 days, or more without food. Actually, question, what's the longest fast you've ever done?
Not that long. Justin really likes his food. I've done a 48 at one point, and I'll be honest, I actually did modify it a tad with some bone broth and things. And I think we'll get into some of those hacks and the different ways to kind of do it. Full disclosure, I work out more than the daily recommended amount for longevity purposes, right? I have these conversations a lot about longevity lifestyle versus performance lifestyle. And oftentimes there's a little bit of overlap, but the further you go into the performance realm, the further I have to take a little bit from the longevity realm potentially. Right. So I work out too much to be going more than 48 hours without eating. That is not a recommendation of mine. That is something that I do personally, and I've done all the biofeedback and what have you. So 48 hours, Justin still got his training wheels on with that one, but I do fast every day as far as the time restricted eating. And I've done that in a lot of ways. I've done 16 and 8, I've done, 20 and 4. Right now I'm on a 12 and 12 because I'm doing a lot of boxing and burning way too many calories. What about you? Have you done some crazy ones in the past?
Actually, I have. The longest fast that I've done is 8 days. Now, granted, it was not a water fast. I did have coffee. I had to have my caffeine, but it was black coffee. Now, I did not every day, but on some of the days I did put some butter in it. So I had the fat, which does not break my fast. Okay. I actually followed, I kept a journal, and I had my Keto Mojo to test my glucose and my ketone levels and to look at that GK index to see, being in ketosis. And I tracked that. I did that like 4 times a day. I would check in with myself, that mindfulness of my body. How did I feel mentally, physically, any physiological symptoms, good, bad, or otherwise, mood, all of these different things. I kept track through all of that. And it was really amazing. And actually, I'm going to kind of throw this out there, but maybe we could even do some sort of fasting challenge in the future. I think that would be really cool. And speaking of not being new to fasting, a lot of the 20th century developments in fasting, there was a lot more exploration in fasting more systematically for research and science. Dr. Otto Buchinger, it's Buchinger. He's a German physician, and he's one of the early pioneers in the therapeutics of fasting. And he did work back in the 1920s, which focused on fasting to treat chronic illnesses. And that led to the establishment of the Buchinger Wilhelmi, which is Wilhelmi clinic. These clinics, they're still in operation today, which is amazing. And, just shows the robust longevity factor of fasting and the research that people have put in. There are other researchers like Dr. Walter Longo from the University of Southern California, who popularized fasting mimicking diets. Also, someone we spoke about the other day during sleep, Dr. Sachin Panda. He's done research at the Salk Institute, and he really brought attention to time-restricted eating as a very powerful method of circadian rhythm optimization. So this really taps into so many different areas of benefits systemically that I mean, it is definitely something to look into, but not something that you should dive into without your research and without speaking with your healthcare professional, because there are definitely people who should not be doing fasting or diving into this without the oversight of their doctor. Women who are pregnant, breastfeeding, people who have any type of medical issues when dealing with food, people who are maybe bulimic or anorexic, or have that a detrimental mental association or trauma with food. I do not recommend diving into intermittent fasting. So there are some other popularized people who have really made fasting important, or, put that spotlight on it in the biohacking field, in functional medicine. So people like Dave Asprey, he wrote the book Fast This Way. I actually read that book years ago when it came out and did his challenge. And, that's kind of what got me started into doing the longer fasts. There's people like Dr. Jason Fung. He wrote several books on the subject, specifically in relation to chronic conditions and cancer. And he actually created the fasting method. People like Dr. Mindy Peltz. Kashif did a summit, hosted the summit with her, Fast Like a Girl, which is one of her books that focuses on how women should be fasting and how it is different than men, and the hormones, not just women in their menses years, but those of peri and post-menopause, that there are nuances when it comes to fasting. Also, like people like Ben Greenfield and Dr. Peter Attia, who wrote the book Outlive, they have wonderful information on fasting. So those are definitely, highlights that this is definitely not a new area of research.
Agreed. People are using fasting for health purposes, for spiritual purposes, for weight loss purposes, microbiome purposes. I'm reminded of this concept of what we call metabolic flexibility, which is something that Dr. Varden and I have talked about. I really think that's also got some ancestral connections there as well, right? We've got this like elegant built-in system of our body to be able to use any given energy substrate, hopefully without any consequence, and just seamlessly transition from one to the next, right? And that's an ancestral, a primal thing, because our ancestors, let's say during the winter months, they would have not had a heck of a lot of carbohydrates handy, a lot of them. So they would have had to just catch an animal. And there we go. Our body's going to derive some energy from fat and protein. And then the spring comes around and they would have undoubtedly stumbled into an apple tree or something, right? And there we go. I'm going to load up on fructose and we're going to get our energy substrate from glucose for a little bit. Then there would have been periods where they weren't successful at any of the above and they would have just fasted. No intake at all. In that case, the body will start to produce ketones, right? As insulin and everything starts to kind of be subdued. And there we go. Our body can now create energy from our own fat storages, right? So that's metabolic flexibility. And I think that that's a really good goal to go after, right? Like educating your metabolism to be able to get energy from whatever given substrate we're providing at that time, and then transitioning to the next one, hopefully without any downside. So, the healthier your microbiome is, the healthier your hormones are. All these things will tie in to make sure that your body can use fat, can use glucose, can even break down protein and get glucose that way via the gluconeogenic pathways, or just don't eat and go ahead and create some ketones in the liver, and your body can access body fat storages as well. So it's so interesting to me how many of these things are really ancient mechanisms that are still applying today.
Oh, absolutely. And, kind of taking that into the scientific research realm when we're talking about metabolic health, the fact of how it improves insulin sensitivity. Intermittent fasting has been shown to reduce insulin resistance. Obviously, this is a key factor in preventing type 2 diabetes. There was a 2019 study in Cell Metabolism by Sutton and his group, which demonstrated that early time-restricted feeding improves insulin sensitivity and lowers insulin levels. And then we also talk about the weight loss. And it's really interesting because I actually do with clients, a metabolic reset where we incorporate time restricted eating, also caloric restriction, but it is in a therapeutic time set where, it's only for 6 weeks, and, using whole real foods, nothing processed, nothing, no protein powders, it's all real food, whole food, and just doing some, herbal supplement drops. But outside of that, it's a matter of being able to level off the hormones that we talked about earlier, that it helps to reset the body, get the insulin sensitivity going, resetting that basal metabolic rate. And it is just serendipitously a byproduct that you lose the weight. Although a lot of people, that's like their first and foremost goal, where I try to shift that perspective and saying, let's get you healthy. Let's get your endocrine system in alignment. Let's get, all of these other aspects, your energy up, and do that, and let the weight loss just be a wonderful thing that happens because we're doing all of those other things. But focused on weight loss, there are numerous studies that have shown that intermittent fasting can be as effective as traditional calorie restriction for weight loss. Actually, a review that was published in Obesity Reviews in 2015 found that intermittent fasting resulted in a 3 to 8% reduction in body weight over 3 to 24 weeks. And this is kind of where, the metabolic reset program that I do, works into it. It leverages, that ability. So what other benefits or issues that you incorporate intermittent fasting with your clients to work off?
Yeah. So, one of the ways I describe fasting is I say that food is information, right? And sometimes it's really beneficial to give our body a break from yesterday's information before we go ahead and pile today's on. It kind of allows your body to work through it. I'm reminded of this calorie equation that we bring up as well, that people talk about calories in versus calories out, and that being the predominant measurement of food intake versus energy expenditure. And on a real literal superficial sense, yes, right, we do take in a certain amount of energy and we expel a certain amount of energy. But between A and Z there's a lot of little chemical exchanges and things going on that will actually influence the outcome. So if we restrict our eating into a time period and give our body that break to work through things, so there's no junky, starches and proteins sitting around in the digestive tract, we really elevate gut health. I think that's one of the main things that I use it for. I'll share a strategy that I use as well to kind of amplify that is I will get people to practice time restricted eating, and then I'll actually get them to superdose themselves on digestive enzymes while they're in that fasted state, which is a cool little protocol, because when you think about the taking of a digestive enzyme, you think about taking it with your meals, which is a good idea. It's going to help you to break down your calories. But in the absence of calories, if you take a bunch of digestive enzymes, well, what are they going to do? They're going to go in and locate any of these old starches that are sitting around and possibly fermenting in there, right? Possibly creating histamines, you name it. And the enzymes are going to work through that. And then they're going to extract the micronutrients, et cetera, and actually create better nutrition for you, right? So it's a good way to kind of clear out the digestive system. So I always look at people's microbiome genes, right? Detoxification genes. And I will usually use fasting as kind of a way to amplify such a thing. Also, if you have, let's say, a really balanced hormone profile, right? Look in your hormones. If you don't make a ton of testosterone, what Dr. Laura just alluded to, at a certain point in a fast, your body creates a lot more testosterone and growth hormone. So that can be a really useful thing, even for just elevating these positive hormone signals. I'll use it for the autophagy now and again as well. It's just that doesn't kick in until I believe 16 hours is when it kind of starts. Right. So I wouldn't jump right into a longer fast without some strategizing surrounding that. But if you do have a pretty serious health condition going on, just knowing that we can actually recycle your cells at a faster rate could have some downstream effects of actually improving even, cancer outcomes and these different things. That's not me giving you official advice. I'm just saying this is what the research suggests. So it depends on the health condition, right? But I think just giving your body a break in the first place really helps to ramp up a number of these processes, and it's great.
Yeah, and it really depends on what is your goal.
Yeah.
To determine the type of fast that you want to do. Well, what is your goal? Some people who have issues, real bad gut issues, as you had alluded to, with the changes in the microbiome with fasting, that can really starve out some of those pathogenic species, help to upregulate, and grow some of the more beneficial, kind of do a little clean out, with the autophagy, it does take a little bit longer for the autophagy to happen, but the fact of clearing out these old worn out cells, clearing out these old worn out mitochondria to help with energy. So there are different nuances with different types of fasting, that we can touch on in a little bit in this webinar, that really can dictate and focus for a particular result. Like we were talking about autophagy, well, that gets into longevity and cellular health. And fasting, like we said, fasting triggers autophagy. Now, some of you, what is autophagy? Autophagy is that process where the cells break down and remove dysfunctional components. So that if you have these zombie type cells, they're hanging around using up the food, but they're not really helping and doing anything, that can really, increase aging. It slows down the body. You don't have as much energy. So by removing them, that can help slow the aging process, and it helps reduce the risk of diseases like Alzheimer's. There was actually a seminal study in Nature by Levine and group in 2014, and it highlighted how fasting induces autophagy and contributes to that improved health span. When we get into the longevity genes, research by someone I mentioned earlier, Dr. Walter Longo, he suggests that intermittent fasting can activate longevity genes like your SIRT1, your sirtuins, okay, and mTOR. And these can extend lifespan and reduce age-related diseases. So, there are so many different things, and, we could even dive deeper into these specific things, maybe, in a podcast or in another webinar, but these are really important. When you are looking at better health, better energy, let's take out the trash. Let's, clean up and have some fresh new, and fasting is a fantastic tool in which to do that. So what other benefits or specific recommendations do you usually deal with your clients?
I'll say that one of the main things, like when we get into this topic with clients, is I always recommend being aware that fasting is kind of a balancing act if you're going to do it, especially in a time restricted way, where it's like every day we're going to condense your eating into this, if it's a 4-hour eating window and they're going to do that every day, I do have to remind them that there does come a point when the body needs nutrients, right? We don't want to overdo any hormetic stress. This is a hormetic stress, just like exercise, just like cold exposure or anything else. So that being said, it is stressful for the body to overfast, and it can take you a little bit to kind of get into it. So once that eating window starts, we want to make sure that you're getting enough protein. We want to make sure that you're getting enough micronutrients, and we don't want to give our body these scarcity signals for too long. So it's about giving your body a break, but it's not about convincing your body that we're not eating because there's just no food, man. I don't know what to tell you. There's none left, and we are never going to eat again, right? We don't want that apocalyptic, signaling going into our body, and it's going to really change our chemistry in a negative way, become a little bit too cortisol dominant, because at a certain point, hormetic stress turns from eustress, which we've talked about, into distress, right? So when I work with clients, I say, let's find that window, right? Let's make it make sense. What time of day are you exercising? What time of day are you going to go to bed? So let's find where that first meal and that last meal should be. And then we just don't eat for the rest of the time. I always say hydration is going to be extra important when we're fasting, unless you're, for whatever reason, not drinking water either, because your insulin is going to be really neutral, right? Which is a good thing. That's where a lot of the weight loss comes from. But insulin also has some positive effects as far as signaling the kidneys to store electrolytes, right? So you can end up, same with if you do like a really strict keto diet for too long, you might end up deficient in minerals pretty quickly, and that can lend itself to, heart palpitations, muscle cramps, brain fog, lots of stuff. So we discover the window first, and then we discover the best case scenario. In Canada, we say the best case Ontario. That way we can make sure that there's no downsides either to how we do it. They're usually going to start feeling better right off the bat, just lose a little bit of that water weight, right? The scale normally comes down within the first 16 hours of doing it. The BDNF, right, will start to amplify at a certain point as well. And that's great. Extra cognition is always enjoyable for all of us. But that's it. It's about a personalization. OMAD, for example, being one meal a day, could be right for someone who's very overweight, for a period of time. But an athlete training twice a day, I don't recommend doing OMAD. You're probably going to be lacking something at some point. So I work with the genes, I work with kind of where they're at, and then we figure out the protocols from there. What do? Do you have like any differing strategies when it comes to that?
Well, when again, working with clients, it's what is their focus? What are their goals? But I will say, there's always the aspect of their mood and behavior, that psychological, emotional aspect, connection to fasting, especially if they're new to it. There's that fear like, oh my gosh, if I don't eat, within 5-6 hours, I'm going to die. Or, they start focusing on food. It's almost that reverse psychology. When you say to restrict in some way, they're like, they want even more. So the preparation for a fasting is very, very important. Setting yourself up for success, having someone, remember, don't start anything like this or dive into this without some sort of oversight or discussions with your, healthcare practitioner, coach, someone, because there's also that aspect of accountability. What do I do? Asking the questions, having that support. I think for a successful fast, no matter what that happens to look like, that being able to do the research, to be comfortable and to be prepared, but also have someone to lean in on, to do a quick text or a call, or, do it as a group, hey, what are you feeling? Are you okay? What do I do? To have that support is really, really important, and I love the fact that once they start getting into it, once they start feeling the benefits, having the inflammation go down, like within, 24 hours, they can start feeling that. Actually, interesting thing is that works into the cardiovascular health, because there is that reduction in inflammation. I mean, there was a study done in nutrition research in 2015 that found that intermittent fasting reduces CRP levels, that's C-reactive protein, which is a systemic inflammation marker. It lowered that up to 30% in healthy individuals. That just happened to be that one study. There are several others that look at this and how it can affect inflammation. Again, with cardiovascular health, cholesterol levels. I mean, a lot of people deal with, higher cholesterol levels, especially when they're ApoE, happens to be off. They might have a ApoE4 in their genetic profile, or, dealing with other cardiovascular profile genes that are not the best. I don't have the best. And I actually use fasting to help with this. But that intermittent fasting can actually improve lipid profiles by lowering LDL cholesterol, triglycerides. And that was actually observed in a 2016 study that was published in Obesity. So, there's the science behind that. Let's see. Let's talk about some chronic conditions. Have you worked with any clients with, say, cancer or other severe gut issues or chronic conditions? And what did you do to help them with incorporation of fasting?
Yeah, I definitely have. I've worked with a number of, cancer patients. Autoimmunity in general is pretty common now as well. And that's usually tied back to gut health. There's a lot of connective tissue there between just gut wall permeability and autoimmune stuff, be it Hashimoto's or eczema, on and on, arthritis. So with fasting, especially if I'm going to recommend a longer fast, I really have to meet them with where they're at if they're a cancer patient, because a lot of them are already really friggin' underweight. And I want to be aware of that with cancer patients. However, there is a lot of literature that would suggest that it helps a ton once that autophagy does kick in, right? Because the cancer cells kind of have nothing to feed off of. And at a certain point in a fast, this is normally the longer fasts, your liver stops producing IGF-1. And it really helps your body to just counteract the growth signal, right? Because if these cells are growing and we really limit mTOR and we encourage something else called AMPK, AMP kinase, it's your cells get this signal that we need to start clearing oxidative stress and different things. So I think it's an effective strategy. It's just, once again, if they're already really underweight, I would probably do more of a bone broth, time restricted eating. There's other things that I would do in that case to make sure that they stay nourished. But for sure, autoimmunity, right? I use intermittent fasting all the time to help just clear out the microbiome. And I'll typically pair that with bone broth, glutamine, colostrum, BPC 157, something to really heal the gut wall as well. And it's amazing because every gut health strategy that we implement thereafter, be it, fermented foods or apple cider vinegar, HCl, prebiotics, probiotics, enzymes, here we go. All of these things, they work so much better once we've already corrected that gut wall issue. So fasting with something to restore that is awesome. And it works really, really well. I've had funny anecdotal things with clients where I ask them to start fasting and we go over it. And they're like, man, my acne cleared up. They're like, I had acne for like 10 years and it's just gone. Like, what happened? And I'm like, man, it's probably the improved detox. It's the improved gut health, because there's a really big connection there as well. So almost all health conditions, really, I think that it has a benefit, right? As far as clearing out the microbiome and elevating positive hormones. I've had guys that had libido issues, and we started doing intermittent fasting of some kind, and it helped them, as long as we do it right. And that's a really important asterisk there. But yeah, a lot of success with it for sure. I just always bear in mind that we need to pay respect to that balancing act that is fasting. If you go overboard and you have a low libido, you're probably going to actually decrease it that much more, because now your body's like, there's really no reason at all to have offspring. There's not even any food available. Right? I'm not going to grant this person testosterone so they have a high sex drive when we can't even feed ourselves, right? So there's a lot of nuances to it. What about you? Any kind of success stories when it comes to intermittent fasting or time restricted eating?
Yeah, actually, it was funny that you had mentioned about the acne, because one client in particular, I remember she had bad eczema. And we started incorporating that. And that's not why we were incorporating it. We incorporated it for something else. And she's like, oh my gosh, my eczema is like cleared up. It's so much better. But these are very typical things that, we are looking at enhancing the body, really leveraging the hormones, the endocrine system, the benefits of autophagy, the cleaning up of the body. This is a root cause, aspect that we're cleaning up the soil that further, down or up the tree into the branches. It's fixing these different problems. And, actually getting back to the cancer aspect, I'm glad you had mentioned the IGF-1, the insulin-like growth factor, because that was actually one of the focused genes and molecules that was measured in a study, a 2015 study in cell stem cell by Cheng, where they actually highlighted how fasting enhanced the effectiveness of cancer treatments by protecting normal cells and targeting cancer cells. And they looked at that insulin-like growth factor being reduced, that risk of certain cancers. Really interesting study. With chronic conditions, if you out there, our audience, who's live right now, or when you're listening, on replays, if you have a chronic condition, I know I've said this before, I want you to consider and think about fasting, not jumping in alone. Work with a healthcare practitioner. But if this is something that you want to incorporate and leverage the knowledge of your genes, of your DNA, DNA 360, and the other tests that we happen to offer, it is really important to be followed, to know where you stand, to know who you are as a whole person, your background, your labs, what you do for work, what toxins are you exposed to look at everything, as well as thinking about incorporation for fasting. And this is part of what we do at the DNA company. And we actually happen to have a program, our precision program, that offers this very specialized, personalized work with you, looking at all of this. And if we have our CEO in the background, I would love to have her tell you a little bit about that and how this can help, especially if you have chronic conditions.
Hi, Dr. Varden. Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, thank you. Good.
You guys are doing a great job. This is really interesting. So yes, we are still allowing people into precision. We've not got very many slots left. But yes, it is for people with chronic conditions. It is for complicated patients. It is for people that have tried a multitude of things and have not been able to get themselves to that end point that's so important to them, to support longevity, to support wellness, to reverse aging. I mean, there's a lot of things that it does. And it allows us to really kind of delve into what's happening to you and provide a solution if we have one, if you're a fit, right? If we're a fit for you and you're a fit for us. So that's what precision is. And it's getting a lot of good press in our functional medicine contemporaries about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So if you guys want to have an intake, CEO at dnacompany.com.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys. Enjoy the rest of your webinar.
I think I would like to take a little bit of time just to go over the different types of fasting. Okay, so I'll start off. So for intermittent fasting, and like I was talking about at the top of this webinar about intermittent fasting and time restricted eating, we're going to focus a little bit more on the intermittent fasting, but there will be some overlap. So for example, one of the things that I said that I do most often, that I incorporate, is the 16-8 method. Now, this involves fasting for 16 hours each day and eating all meals within an 8-hour window. So, for example, if you finish your last meal at 8 p.m., you wouldn't eat again until noon the next day. Normally, I try to end around 6 o'clock. And, I may have my first meal, at 10 or sometimes even a little bit later. But so really, that's one of the most common forms of intermittent fasting. And really the shift when you're doing like a 12-12, that's 12 hours fasting, 12-hour eating window. If you do an 18-6, that condenses that window even more. OMAD, 1 meal a day, that condenses just for that one meal, but that one meal could last like an hour, okay, or 2 hours. So, but you only have that one meal. So that's, working more into where the time restricted eating and the intermittent fasting overlap. So Justin, what's another type of intermittent fasting that you want to share?
I know a lot of people also do this alternate day fasting, right? And it's like, it's a little bit more on the extreme side if you're going to do it for the full 24 hours, right? Because you would eat normally, quote unquote, for a day. And then the next day you would do a full 24 and then eat normally in a full 24. I know people who've done that. I would say that's a little bit far on the hormetic stressor, side of things. So it's not necessarily something I recommend unless you're really a seasoned veteran at it. A lot of people, they'll do their normal eating schedule and then they'll just pick a day, a Saturday or a Sunday or something, and they'll just do a full 24 then. Really, you can do a lot of combos of strategies as well, right? So like myself, I eat in a 12 and 12 condensed window. That's pretty much almost every day, but one day a week, I actually disrupt that so the body doesn't get used to it. So I'll just eat as soon as I get up. And then some days I'll do a 24, right? So that's actually 3 strategies that I'll actually implement because that way my body doesn't get too used to a rhythm. I don't think our ancestors would have done that as far as like they didn't have a watch and be like, it's time to feed and now it's time to do it. Like you would kind of just do it when it came up for them. So I try not to be on too much of a rhythm with it. But yeah, alternate day fasting, time restricted eating, or those longer fasts, really like longer than a 72-hour fast. You can do it, but that's going to be something that you want to be somewhat monitored with, I would say. But for people who have these real chronic conditions like we talked about, that's where it would come into play because you're going to get into a deeper state of ketosis, right? Your body's really going to be operating on ketones. There's no glucose intake. And that's where you're going to get some serious weight loss happening and different things. So longer fasts, and then there's just kind of this combo of strategies. Those are the main ones.
Another one that people may not be as familiar with is a 5-2 diet. And in this approach, you eat normally for 5 days of the week and restrict calorie intake to about 500 or 600 calories on 2 non-consecutive days. This allows for some caloric intake on fasting days, and it does differentiate it from total fasting. But this could be like an introductory type way of working into that fast, starting to take baby steps into getting your body more metabolically flexible, getting kind of used to not eating as much. So that's another way of doing it. There's also what they call the warrior diet. And this approach involves eating small amounts of raw fruits and vegetables during the day, and then eating one large meal in the evening, typically within a 4-hour eating window. And it's very similar to that 24 fasting pattern, like 20 hours of fasting, 4-hour eating window. So that's another one. Are there any others we possibly have not mentioned? I mean, obviously there's the ones where you're actually doing, fasting for 36, 48, 72, and even working into the several days, which you need to prepare your body for. I will tell you, when I had done the 8-day fast, I made sure that I didn't have anything major going on, that I could actually focus on that. I mean, I had daily, things, but it's not like I had, a major exam or, that I had to, have some big event or anything like that, because it is stress on the body. You want to have it where it's a bit more laid back during that time period. But are there any others you can think of that we may have missed?
Yeah, the only other thing that would come to mind would be these modified fasts, right? Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned, having buttered coffee partway through a fast. And for you, it didn't, elevate insulin or blood glucose. So it didn't break it on that level. So you tend to get a lot of these fasting benefits. It's just that you're still taking in some calories to where it's not miserable. So it would be like modified fasts with these various hacks, right? Like sometimes if I'm going to fast longer than I want to, I'll use some essential amino acids partway through the fast, just so that my muscles still have something to work with, some kind of anabolic activity in there. The bone broths, the coffees and the different teas that you can do, autophagy tea, different people will use. So you can modify it as well. And what I would say is that if you are going to do butter in your coffee and use that as a fasting hack, that's when I would actually have a look at your genes and take a look. Because if you have a really suboptimal TCF7L2 and a totally suboptimal ApoA2, if you have a lot of butter in that coffee, you might actually still get a bit of an insulin spike out of it. And then you might as well operate as though your fast has been broken at that point. It's still going to be delicious and fuel your hormones and do some good for you, but you're probably not going to get a ton of fasting benefits if your insulin goes up, right? So fat can actually cause that if your genes aren't totally laid out for it. But if they are, and you're set up for a ketogenic diet, yeah, have a cup of that in the morning and then go ahead and do your normal fast, and then don't eat a heck of a lot of starches and things during your eating window. You'll probably still lose weight and get a lot of benefit out of that as well.
Justin, do you want to talk a little bit into how to correctly break a fast?
Yes, and it's important to note here that this depends on what kind of fast you did, right, and how long it was and what your goal with the fast was. If you're just doing a condensed eating window, you could probably eat a fairly normal breakfast. Like I do a 12 and 12. I don't really have to do anything super duper special here in order to break my fast. I can break my fast with what I would normally eat anyways, eggs and some friggin' fruit and good to go. I think if you've done, anything longer than a 24, it's exactly what Dr. Laura said. You're going to have to really be aware that we don't want to take in a gigantic meal right now, because even the size of your stomach kind of gets a little bit smaller just from the lack of intake. So you're probably not going to feel very good if you do that. I would recommend a little bit of hydration, right? Get a little bit of minerals in, maybe take a little shot of apple cider vinegar or something to boost the stomach acid back up a little bit. Some people that might cause GI upset. So just know if you can do that or not. I would favor a small amount of protein, like a pretty well-rounded meal, maybe a little bit of vegetables, a little bit of starches in there is perfectly fine, but don't go too heavy. Don't make it a really calorie dense meal because your body's not going to react very well to it. So I would say keep it whole foods as well, obviously, and don't do a large dose of starches either. Your blood sugar has been so suppressed that if you really spike it on purpose, an hour later, you're probably not going to feel very good. Right. So a good, just well-rounded, let's call it organic paleo meal. That's probably your best bet. And quickly, I did want to mention something about, just because we had 2 thyroid questions in a row there. There's a lot of nuances to that, right? Because your gut does play a role in the converting of T4 into T3. So does your liver. Right. So if you have, let's say, Hashimoto's, and it is likely autoimmune related, over time, doing fasting in a proper way can upregulate microbiome function and improve it. So downstream, that might have some really positive effects on your thyroid, your thyroid output. So just be aware of that. But it's a balancing act, because as Dr. Laura mentioned, if we have too much reverse T3, they can kind of take up the thyroid receptor sites, and that means the active T3 can no longer bind to them. So you're going to end up with less useful T3 because of that. So just know that there's going to be some benefit and some downside, but that's where I would recommend a program as well, because we could actually figure out the proper way to do that if you're struggling with your thyroid.
And on that note, I would like to say thank you, everyone, for being here, for joining us in this webinar. I hope you took away some great information that you will seriously consider and look into doing your homework on fasting, the benefits thereof, but working with a practitioner to help you walk through this. Justin, you're always such a joy to work with, a wealth of information. I appreciate you, and I appreciate our angels in the background, but especially our audience. Thank you for being here. We wouldn't be here without you. So until then, until next week, I bid you adieu and have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night, Dr. Laura. See everybody next week.